I'm reading from a book called Win by Pastor Stephanie Trayers, who co-leads Summit Church in Springfield, Virginia, with her husband, Pastor Eddie Trayers. And I'm reading in chapter 5 called Believe Resurrection Realities. And I'll just plunge right in. Luke 24, 1-11 describes the resurrection of Jesus. Women brought spices to the tomb early on Sunday morning, but the huge stone that covered the entrance had been rolled aside and Jesus' body was gone. Two angels appeared and asked the woman this: "Why are you looking in a tomb for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He has come back to life again. Don't you remember what he told you back in Galilee? That the Messiah must be betrayed into the power of evil men and be crucified, and that he would rise again the third day?" Then they remembered and rushed back to Jerusalem to tell 11 disciples and everyone else what had happened. Jesus had told his disciples that he was going to die and rise again. But when the women came and told them that he had indeed risen, verse 11 says the story sounded like a fairy tale to the men. They didn't believe it. The 11 disciples eventually all believed and even saw Jesus for themselves. At first, though, the story that Jesus had risen from the dead seemed made up. But before we are quick to judge the disciples for not immediately believing, let's look at another resurrection that some of us don't fully believe yet. Our own. Colossians 2:12 says, "You were buried with him through baptism and raised with him through faith in the power of God, who raised him from the dead." Did you catch that? We were raised with Jesus. I'll read it again. You were buried with him through baptism and raised with him through faith in the power of God, who raised him from the dead. All too often, the idea that we have been raised with Christ sounds like a fairy tale to us as we think about all the realities of our natural life: family, school, work, finances, our health. These are the realities that we deal with every day. Resurrection sounds like something we'll be thinking about when our life is coming to an end and we're about to go to heaven. But actually, we were resurrected with Christ. Where is in the past tense. This resurrection has already happened. When Jesus was raised from the dead, we were raised with him. Does that still sound like a fairy tale, considering all the realities of life you are dealing with? Remember that we must focus on the truth, not just our situation. In the previous chapter, we saw the importance of setting our mind on things above. Let's read those verses from Colossians 3, 1 and 2 in the Passion Translation. Christ's resurrection is your resurrection too. That is why we are to yearn for all that is above. That's where Christ sits enthroned at the place of all power, honor, and authority. Yes, feast on all the treasures of the heavenly realm and fill your thoughts with heavenly realities and not with the distractions of the natural realm. I like that. That's Colossians 3, 1 and 2. Christ's resurrection is your resurrection too. This is why we are to yearn for all that is above. For that's where Christ sits enthroned at the place of all power, honor, and authority. Yes, feast on all the treasures of the heavenly realm and fill your thoughts with heavenly realities, not with the distractions of the natural realm. Jesus was resurrected, but the disciples did not know it at first and were focused on the darkness and sadness of the hour. So when they heard that Jesus was risen, they thought it was nonsense and that the women who had been at the tomb were making up stories. When our thoughts are on the darkness of the day we're living in, or when we are distracted by the natural realm, heavenly realities seem like something made up. They just seem like fairy tales. But this news is too important not to believe. Our resurrection with Christ is our reality. Circumstances will come and go, but these heavenly realities remain true. The Bible instructs us to feast on the treasures of the heavenly realm. Our minds can feast on thoughts of Jesus being seated at the right hand of God, enthroned in power, and positioned above every evil thing that exists. We can fill our minds with thoughts like our own, seating next to him in that heavenly place. And you can read such a beautiful description of this in Ephesians 1, verse 20 to 22, and also Ephesians 2, verses 4 to 6. If we're hearing these truths for the first time or haven't thought about them in a while, they may seem too good to be true. God did raise us up with Christ, but we will never enjoy the reality of this position if we don't do our part. The Bible instructions are clear about what our part is. We are to fill our thoughts with these heavenly realities. By keeping these thoughts in our minds, we'll stay in victory, no matter what's going on around us. The disciples eventually experienced the joy of Jesus' resurrection. Likewise, the more we think about this truth, the more we will experience the joy of being raised with Christ. Hallelujah.